Hey guys, Dave here with Take a Break Spas and Billiards. Today we are going to work on pool tables. We're going to show you how to level a table. We're going to show you how to cover it with the cloth. We're going to show you how to get it all set up, do the rails, do the table, do everything. Let's jump into it. First of all, what we're going to do is get the frame of the table assembled. Once the frame is all assembled, you're going to want to put your slate down on top of your pool table, okay? And once the slate's on the pool table, we're going to grab our handy tape measure and we're going to make sure that this is centered onto our frame. What I like to do is take and pinch it, measure it, and you're going to see that I'm just over 3 inches there and I'm just about 3 3/4. So I'm about an inch off. And I'm also going to see on this side, I've got about 2 1/4 overhang. And oh goodness, we got almost 3 1/2. So this slate needs to come this way and that way. I'm just gonna kind of guesstimate it right now because we're so far off. Sometimes a rubber mallet is very nice when you want to move it just a little bit. And what I'm doing here is making sure that my lines here are very much in line and squared up. And you can feel that. The other thing that I don't mind doing is checking the pocket in relation to here to make sure that the table is actually square on it, and that looks and feels very, very good. What I like to do is do a thing that's called liquid nails, and I'm going to put business cards in between here. Typically, I'm going to do that. It's very, very important that you do this on other tables, maybe not as much on Olhausen because they do have the center points in there, but to show this on other tables is definitely a step that we want to do. Take my business cards. I'm going to rip these in half. What I like to do, actually the thinner and crappier business cards you have, the better. And we're going to put one there, one there. Any table you do, you'd want to put them in the middle. Olhausen, not so important simply because they do have screws there, but we want to put them there anyway. So let's show you how we're going to do this. I'm just going to lift this up and I'm going to take and insert this right there. You can see how tight that slate is. And hopefully I can get, I can get the card down inside there. I just kind of like to do 3 of them in the middle and have that card poking up. Now that I've got my cards placed in there, the reason for this is what we're going to end up doing is we're going to put some super glue, very thin, in fact the thinner the better, super glue in between those. Now I'm going to bump that back tight again. Now we're going to go into leveling the table. When it comes to leveling the table, the first thing you want to do is make sure you've got some shims. And the way that I like to level a table, first of all, is to level it underneath the legs, in between whatever your surface is and the legs. So we're going to level it down here with our shims, and we're going to get it absolutely as close as you possibly can to getting it perfect. And then the remainder of the level we're going to do is going to be between the slate and the frame. And the idea between the slate and the frame is we want to keep our shimming down to a minimal. I like to use these composite shims. The other thing that we like to do on our team is we'll take a shim and we'll divide this into 3s. We'll call the first third of the shim a 1, we'll call the middle a 2, and the last part we'll call a 3. I've actually got those already broken up here. So there's a 3, there's a 2, and there's a 1. And sometimes when we're doing this, we're working as a team. And so if you're calling out to your teammate, you can let them know I need a 1, a 2, or a 3. And we all know that we're speaking the same language. So first of all, what we're going to want to do is we're going to check the level of our table. What I like to do, if you want to come in and take a zoom in on this, is we're going to look at the end of the table this way. Look at it from endwise. We can see that our bubble is off and that this actually is the low side and it needs to come up on the right side over here. So this side needs to come up because I'm lifting the level to about there, and that's perfect. We're going to check the middle, see what we got, and that's closer but still off, telling me the same side. What is my right, left to the camera, but right to me is going to tell me that side needs to come up. I'm going to check this side as well, and that one, the same thing. Everything's telling me that end needs to come up. So before we are done, the last thing I want to also do is check my side to side. And on here, you're going to notice my side to side is absolutely perfect. That looks really good. You can use a machinist level if you'd like to. It goes to the next level. I've had really good success with just a good standard bubble level. It works really, really good. Never had any problems with that. But if you want to go to the next level, be my guest. Use a machinist level. There's all kinds of ways to level tables, but this is a really, really good way. Now that I'm checking it this way, side to side, you're going to see that the bubble needs to definitely come up on the right side. And I am guessing that that needs to come up about a 2 on this leg. And if this is going to come up a 2 and this whole side needs to come up, what I'm actually going to do is put a 1 under this leg, and I'm going to put a 3 under this leg. And let's do that and we'll see how it goes. Now the easiest way to do this, depending on your table, one guy can do this. Yes, these things are heavy. Each piece of slate weighs about 100, 160 pounds, depending on it is. But if you'll grab the one thing of slate and you get down underneath, you'll notice that I'm going to lift this with my back. Super easy. I'm going to park my shoulder right there. I'm going to lift underneath it. And very simply, I'm going to just be careful not to set it down on my finger, but I'm going to set that underneath that leg. Then I'm going to grab my 3. Same thing on this side. Lift it with your back. Slide that underneath there. You want to make sure your shims don't poke out. Make sure they're underneath the table so that they're not visual whatsoever. And actually, when I'm finally doing this, I'm going to put a couple of shims underneath there to give it a little more stance to sit on, especially if it's going to compress into the carpet. You don't want to just put one shim, but actually use a couple of shims of the same height to spread that out. But now that we've done that, let's come back here and let's check and see what we've got on our level. We're really, really, really close. I'm going to say that's probably good. And on this side, what have we done? Ooh, that is really, really, really close. In fact, I'm going to say that's about perfect, guys. Normally, it's not quite this good. This is an Olhausen table. I will tell you that Olhausen has some of the most level frames, strongest, sturdiest frames, and are definitely easier to put together. That level is actually really good right now. We are going to take very minimal shim in between to fix this, in between the table. So now the next part that we're going to do is we're going to run over here. We're going to grab our lag screws that actually screw the slate to the frame. One of the easiest things to do, just for sake of speed, is grab all your lag screws, put them all on the table. You'll also notice that Olhausen, a key feature of Olhausen is they actually put slate screws out in the center of the playing surface to really, really lock this seam down. We're going to add extra screws there. You won't find that on most of your tables. Use a number 3 Phillips tip in these lag screws. Obviously get the tip that fits your screw. These screws happen to be number 3s, which work a lot better. Now that we've determined where our table at, to finish leveling this thing, to know which side we're going to start on, when it's really this close, it can be a little bit difficult. But what I prefer is to have it just a little bit off, so that I'm going to start on whatever is the high side. If this side is still high and this side is still low, I'm going to start at the high side and level this piece of slate first and bring everything up to level with it. So on here, let's just double check that that is in fact the case. I'm also checking my seams to see how flat these feel. They do feel pretty darn close. I'm going to start on this end of the table, and I'm actually going to put my screws in, because I believe this is still my high side, and this side here is still my low side, okay? Simply put, since we know this is close, and when you bury these screws, you want to put them in really at the correct tightness. You don't want to over tighten them. You can strip them out very easily. To that, I would say, learn your tools and learn how tight they're going to tight that, so don't over tighten it. But right here on this end, you can adjust the level, believe it or not, of this table ever so slightly with just how tight you make these screws. Maybe a click or two, depending on your drill, will actually change that bubble ever so slightly. And that, you guys, is perfect. That's what you want to see. That is perfect, okay? Where I want it to be. Now, we're going to check it this way. Now that we've locked it in level-wise this way, okay? We actually don't have any shim underneath there. This is interesting. This is a good way to look at, because if you look closely, this side over here needs to come up, which tells me I'm going to stop right now, and I'm going to go to this end. If this side needs to come up, and I might get over here, or rather I get back to this side, and I get all the way down to the end of the table, and it won't go down, it won't go down. It's going to have to come up. So because this side here Every table is different. Quite frankly, everyone is different. And that is telling me absolutely this needs to come up, but it needs to come up less than a 1. I don't want to bring it up even a 1. So let's check this side again. Ooh. Same thing. Guess what? That's saying that this side needs to come up ever so slightly. So let's start at this end. Get everything off of there. Make sure we don't have anything on there. And that's really, really close side to side, guys. So set your screws. Set our 2 end screws. Okay, so now I'm just setting those to it like a medium hard lock. I could go a hair tighter and I could go a hair less if I need to adjust this a little bit. The other thing that we could use, if we need to, are business cards. And we can simply use these as shims in between the slate and the frame to adjust this if it's less than this. And you'll see we use a lot of cards to do that. As for right now, that is so close that if I go a couple of clicks there, 1 click backwards on there, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. Now, we're gonna go this way. So I'm locked it in this way, side to side. This is dead level. Now we're gonna start working the table back this way. And again, this is so close, you guys. When I anchor these screws, I know it's gonna pull this down just a little teeny bit. So you kind of have to preload that a little bit. And right now, if I just drop those down, this might work out really, really nice. So I'm gonna take and set this. I'm gonna bring that down and let's check the level. That's perfect. This side, kind of stay out of the camera. Right now, that's pretty darn close. You can see it's off just a skosh. And what I'm gonna do is tighten this down. And that's even more perfect. So because it is perfect at this point, now I'm just gonna continue and get my seams to where these are absolutely lined up perfectly. And I can see that right now, that is probably gonna need 1 business card. If you can see that in the camera, but I can catch a nail there. Ooh. I got that screw pretty tight and I could still catch a nail, so I'm actually gonna pull that out. That is perfect. Now we're gonna come over here. I can catch a nail this way. So this is gonna drop down just a little bit. And that is perfect. When you feel that, can't catch a nail, can't catch a nail. You can adjust these just to where it's locked down. And I'm even gonna set this. You're gonna be really careful when you're putting the center screws in, because if you do really put these in, you can actually crown the slate and pull it down. So good idea to feel the center as you're doing that and make sure that you're not doing that. So I'm kind of working those screws back and forth to make sure that that's absolutely perfect. And just for fun, let's check and see where we're at level-wise. Perfect still. We've got our seam set, so I'm gonna move on to the next one. More often than not, what we're actually doing here is we're putting shims, starting with a full-length shim, and we're placing it underneath the table, placing it in between the slate and the frame, right up in here. And we're bringing this up. And oftentimes you're actually putting a small shim in there to flatten that out, and you're working yourself down. We could also check it at this point. See what are we side to side. It's still perfect, it's dead on. Normally they're not this level. I would tell you typically the technique that you're gonna use is placing shims, level this piece, then bring this piece up to level that your seams are perfect, level this piece. Then bring this piece up, level this piece, and make sure that everything is absolutely perfect and your seams are locked in. We're gonna recap a little bit on what we've done here, how to level this table. Typically speaking, you're going to be needing, I would say probably 75% of the time or more, you're gonna be putting shims between the frame and the slate. This table just so happens that it's very level. We're on a very good concrete level floor here, but more often than not, we got a shim in between. And what you want to do when you're doing that is we're going to figure out which side of our table is high and which side of our table is low. And if this were the table that were low and this is the high end, we would start on our high end. We level this end first, make sure that it's dead perfect. And once that's locked in, then we level this up. And typically you'd put a shim right here next to your screw. Don't put it underneath, when you put it under the table, don't put it right here where the screw has to go through it. We want to make sure that we put it just off to the side so that it gets in between here. And then what we would do, we take our level, put this on here, level it in between here, take a rubber mallet or whatnot, pound that shim in until that is perfectly level. And what I actually do is bring it just a hair above level, because when I put my screw in, it's going to pull it down ever so slightly. It takes a little bit of practice to know how to get the screw tight when it's level. But we're going to put the shim here. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Often there's two of us. One guy works one side of the table, the other guy works the other side of the table. And then once this piece here, I'm going to leave that there just for reference, is where that would go underneath. And that were to get level, and this side here were to be level. Let's say we had to put those underneath there to level that. Now that side is set, it's perfect. Everything here should need to come up. This should need to come up. So we'll work ourselves down. Again, once this is level, the next thing we're gonna do is gonna set the center seam. So we're gonna put our shims in between here to make sure this seam is dead perfect. Then what I'm gonna do is put a shim underneath here, bring this side up to get this level. Once I get it level, then I lock my seam in. And I make sure that it's just a hair above again, because as you tighten this up, it's gonna drop just a little bit. But once this levels out, you're checking your seams every time you're doing it. But as this comes up to level, you're gonna set the center piece, then we're gonna move to the end piece and make sure that it's perfectly level. The best part about that is as we bring these pieces up to level, by the perfect shim placement, we get to the end. On the end, you're gonna place shims underneath the frame on this side to bring this up. If for some reason this needs to go down, you did it backwards. You gotta start over, start at this side and work yourself back. It does happen sometimes when they're really close. But the best part is when you put the shim here and you put the shim here and you lock those in, you're gonna make sure that you're level here perfect. It shouldn't be very far off at all. It should be really, really close. And that's how you know that you brought it level perfectly. Check all your levels. So once you get it completely level, now we're ready to move on to the next step. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the seams. We're gonna wax these, and we're actually gonna fill up our holes on our old housing table with our beeswax. So we've got 100% beeswax here. But before we do that, we wanna lock these in. You'll notice we've put our business cards in here. What you wanna do is get yourself a razor blade. Just go ahead and trim those off level with the surface. I think it's easier to do that because now what we're going to do is we're gonna grab our super glue, which is the runnier the better on this stuff. And you're gonna place this right over the card. That card is gonna act as a wick that's gonna take the super glue down in between the slates. Now that we've got them locked in, they're perfectly set. It's gonna help to lock that slate in so that it doesn't move whatsoever. So we're gonna go ahead and hit all of these guys on here. Again, the waterier the better. Then we've got some stuff. This is Accelerator. This is a Zip Kicker brand. Basically, the nice thing about this, once it's set on there for just a minute, you're gonna wanna just bump that just ever so slightly. And that is going to make that super glue dry so you don't have to wait for it. And that's all it takes. Then we're gonna go back with our razor blade. And we're gonna take now, we're gonna be very careful to make sure that we get that completely trimmed down, because the next step is gonna be to put our wax over it. Sometimes what I'll do is just take all my mess and put it to the middle of the table. Now we're gonna go on to our next step. Now we're gonna take our beeswax. Usually I'll have what I've done from previous tables. We'll wrap that around a ball that we just kind of put on a screwdriver. Since I wanna get some more, I'm gonna just start with a fresh one. Sometimes when you're using it, actually, the more you use it, I kind of like it better. It goes in and scrapes off easier when it's like that, but let's get our wax fired up here. Sometimes what I'm gonna like to do, this plate has been at room temperature for quite a while now, so it doesn't need to warm up too much, but I'm gonna put a little bit of heat on that. Notice I just tested that with my hand to see how warm it is. And then I'm gonna do this. A lot of techniques. I personally like to just take and touch it to the table. Let that drip in, and now I'm gonna lift it and do a second pass. And now on this one, I'm gonna take and begin filling up my holes here. Then what I'm gonna do is just go ahead and quickly and finish spreading that out. And with some tables, this one we don't need to. With some tables, you do need to fill these holes as well. Check the distance between the screw holes. In fact, you know, we can show you that since I happen to have a tape measure. In between the screw holes there and there, what you'll notice is 44 inches is what it is. So since we're in the middle, or just under 44, it's gonna overhang enough that the ball will not hit this. You'll be able to feel up underneath the rail, but the ball will never hit it. And now that that is still warm, what I like to do is turn this at an angle. Go ahead and scrape this off. And when you get this piece here, you'll notice that that wraps around my ball very nicely and gets ready so that I can remelt that on the next time. Notice these things are still not dried yet. So let's go onto this side. I'm gonna heat this up. Just a little bit. Just makes the wax go in a little bit better. Do one pass. Do another pass. Spread that out. Sometimes you need to just throw a little bit more in those guys right there. Those are going to take a minute to dry. Let those set. While this is still, one of the things you can do is put your hand over it once it gets to the point that it won't stick to your hand, of course, and that'll tell you how warm it is. You're better off scraping this off when it's still warm. Once this gets cold, it's hard, and it's also hard to scrape off. But now that it's still warm, you'll notice how easy that comes off. You'll also notice again, I don't recommend plowing with it so it squishes it all up. If you take it at an angle like I just did, you'll notice you'll get this nice big stringy on here that's super easy to wrap around the wax ball. So just saves you some wax so you can reuse that, okay? And you also want to hit that a couple of times. So I would say be careful with this because this is sharp. You can get cut with that. Pull that both ways. Making a little bit of a scratch line on there, you'll notice. It actually isn't bringing up anything though. Notice on that next pass, I got quite a bit. These, now that these are setting, I'm gonna put my hand over it because I'm taking the heat out of it so it dries a little bit quicker. You know, another trick you could do is put this over the top of it. Since this is cold, it'll act as a heat sink and pull the heat out and make those dry a little bit quicker for you. Once those get to that point, I like to kind of move across it. As I hit that, you'll tend to get a much cleaner cut rather than just going across like that. Sometimes that works great. But let's clean those off, and then you want to feel those and make sure those are perfect. Notice I'm going over this a couple of times. And really the best tool that you have at this point is your hand. You can feel any imperfections whatsoever in there. That feels really good. Then we're going to go ahead and repeat that on the other side. So I'll tell you what we want to do on this time. Zoom in close and you're going to get on just this side of the table. We're going to start, first thing we're going to do is we're going to fill up our holes on here. I'm going to get these started because they're going to take a while to dry. So we're gonna set those. While those are in there, I'm gonna heat this up just a little bit. A lot of ways to do this. I don't mind touching the wax again to the table. In my first pass, and the second pass, we're going to kind of put heat on the table and on there, spread that out nice and good like that. Third pass, I'll just kind of make sure it's spread out. Really the point of that is just to get the wax. It actually will go down inside the seam if it's apart at all. We want to try to get those slates together as tight as we can, so very little, if any, actually goes down in between. But we want to use that to mainly just seal that lip right on top. If there's any out of level whatsoever, that would fix it. Once it gets to this point, put our hand on it to take the heat out. We want it to be warm. Once it's warm, we're going to take and turn this at an angle. Just kind of skipped a little spot right there and right there, and that's okay. Now that you get this, you can take those little pieces there, wrap that around your wax ball. Makes it really good. I'm gonna go fast here before that gets too dried on me. We're gonna go back on our second pass. This time I'm gonna pull it towards me. It doesn't matter whether you push or pull it. Let's scrape that off. Good and clean. We'll scrape that up. Just for fun, we'll go right over the top of those. We're gonna fill them more in here in a minute. Obviously you can see we need quite a bit of that one. That one's pretty close. So I'm gonna stay on this side of the table. Usually it's easier to walk around, but because we're videoing this, I'm gonna reach over from this side of the table. Let's put some more in that one. Put some more in that one. Whip your wax in there. Spread that out. Keep making sure your lag screws are good. We'll let those dry. Now we're going to scrape this side of the table. Put that around your wax ball. So just go ahead and scrape that good and clean. And I do think 100% beeswax is the best way to do this. Sometimes when these guys won't dry, because they're just too hot, just kind of getting some of that out of the way. You'll notice that one, I can actually put my hand over that, act as a heat sink to, notice how fast that's drying now. I don't want to do that one yet or it'll stick to my hand. It's a little too hot. Fan it down just a little bit. Now I can probably, isn't that interesting? As soon as I do that, you can see how your hand pulls the heat. This speeds it up a little bit. Get some of those out of the way. So again, we just want to get that to where it's warm. And if you'll slice across it like that, you'll tend to get a little cleaner fill on there. That one that's a good illustration of I did not let that dry enough. This one we did. This one you can see that it needs a little bit, so I'm gonna pull some more heat out of that, and oftentimes you end up having to put a little more wax on it and redo it. You know, that's actually pretty darn close, but just to make sure those are perfect, I'm gonna give it just a little bit of heat. Just add a little bit more to those. one more time. Fan them a little bit. Sometimes you just have to be patient. Let those sit. Just helps to cool that off. Now that those are good, we're gonna hit that. Hit that. Then you want to make sure and feel those and make sure those are dead perfect. We should be good. Now what I want to do is just make for certain that this is just one more pass over that. Make sure that's perfect. And you can feel this really good with your hand to make sure that everything, there's no bumps or anything on there. And now, first thing that we're gonna do is make sure that we get it all cleaned off. We got most of the stuff off of there. So all of our little bits of wax, I've got a box right here, kind of a little garbage box that I'm gonna scrape it off to. And what I like to do is literally just go all the way around the table by hand, because you can feel if there's anything on it. Now that we've got that all cleaned off, I'm just kind of double checking some things that I feel on there. One of the things you can do too is take the cloth and sweep it all off like a big broom. But if you'll get down and look at it, you'd be surprised. You could actually pick up a single grain of salt sitting on that table if it were there. Once we've got all this, there's nothing on there, perfectly clean, is I'm gonna grab the bag that my cloth came in, and we're gonna get some what we call pocket liners that we wanna put on the sides of this thing. Let's go ahead and grab our cloth that we've already measured. Put that over here. Grab our blade. Make sure that this is a good square cut already. And I'm gonna take, back about an inch. We're just gonna make a little cut in it right there. That's about how thick I want that to be. Then we're gonna go ahead and tear this. And it will always tear straight depending on how it was cut the first time. So you'll notice we have our perfectly straight. So these are gonna be for our pocket liners. What I like to do is measure that up like that. Cut that in half with my blade. Go ahead and rip it. Take these pieces here and cut them in thirds because we need 6 of them. Folded that in thirds. And this doesn't have to be perfect. You can just rip it because it always rips straight. And these don't need to be measured to perfectly the exact same length. Just so happens that I got pretty lucky on those. In fact, just for fun, let's put them this way. And I'm also going to want to make sure that I put, this particular cloth is Simonis, which is really good cloth. And I want to make sure that the side that I'm spraying, we're going to put spray glue on this, is the side that's faced up. At this point, don't pay a lot of attention to all the little, this kind of stuff that's on there. If you do, oh boy, it'll drive you nuts with Simonis. So I'm just going to spread those out there. I'm going to grab our spray adhesive. And what I like to do with this is spray this. Put a pretty good amount on there. So I like to do, and now what we're gonna do is we're gonna spray up on here. It's not a bad idea if you wanna get a piece of cardboard or something like that. We're gonna put this underneath here, and I'm gonna overspray up. So if I get any on the table, that's just fine. Put a thin layer on there, go right to our end here, put your cardboard. Again, your overspray can be on the table. Now that we've got that, these have set long enough. One of the things I like to do, if I'm doing this alone, I'm just gonna take and drag this around. Grab my little cuts there, stage them on my table. They'll stick to your finger if you put enough glue on them. Now what we're gonna do, when you put this on, what's really important is that you cover the bottom, because there's little V cuts that we're gonna make, relief cuts in our cloth. What you really wanna do is make sure that that covers the bottom of your table. Really doing this for illustration purposes. On this old house and slate, you could almost get away with not putting these because this is such a gradual pocket. Some pockets are much more rounded, so the V notches they're gonna cut in here are much more visible. These ones, you honestly wouldn't even need this, but we're gonna do that there just in case. Now on our center pockets, we definitely want to make sure and put our cloth in there, and you'll notice that I'm folding just enough that it's on the bottom. So it goes on the bottom. I don't care about this up here because it's gonna get covered. With those like that. This can be done fairly quickly. Now, what I wanna do is grab my cloth here. Sometimes I'll use an assistant and we'll actually take and drag this off. Since I'm alone today, I'm gonna take this, put that out on the table. That's the bottom side. I'm just gonna drag that off just in case there's any dust or dirt on there. There shouldn't be anything. I'm gonna just drag that off, shake that loose. One last look, and I see a little teeny thing poking up right there. Not that it matters, but I could see that when I was down. So now we're ready to cover it with cloth. But before we do, we've got to get our rail cuts out. So I'm going to get my handy tape measure and this, because on this cut of cloth, we're actually going to take 2 cuts for rail cuts off the side on this. But so that we make sure that we cut our cloth, this is actually really important for our guys. Before you make any cuts to figure out where your rail cuts are coming from, put your cloth over your table, spread it out, and make sure that you're taking your rail cuts from the correct side of your table. So let's spread that out on there. If I put that to just barely overhanging there, I got plenty on the ends. I noticed that I have a whole bunch on this side. One of the things that I like to do as well, you'll notice that there's a little logo, I want Simonis, stamped in on this side. Most people don't want that to show, so I'm gonna leave that on the table. And you'll notice this side does not have an I want Simonis on it, so I'm actually gonna take my rail cuts from this side. And in my bag, they typically will provide 2 rail cuts like this here, and they nick it for you so you can already tear it, but they already come just like that. So just go ahead and pull that apart. There's 2 of your rail cuts. Now we need 4 more. Those 4 are gonna come off the side. Hopefully that makes sense. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure this. You want your rail cuts to be 6 inches. And I do, so I'm gonna go right to there. That's my 12-inch mark, and I'm gonna make a little nick right there. We're gonna take and pull this. Again, it will always rip straight. Kind of freaks people out a little bit, but that's what you get with cloth. Now, since we're in the middle of this, let's finish this. Let's just go ahead and fold that in half, just in case I didn't cut it exactly on 6 inches. Finish with that. So there's rail cuts 3, 4, and 5 and 6. If you do get some little strands on there, don't worry about them. Pretty common with Simonis. Lots of little stringies with this stuff. Lots of stringies. Catch it there. Again, really important that you'll notice that I did take and look to see where I was going to get my rail cuts from before I cut them. And you'll notice this little stringy went underneath my table. That would have caused a problem. If you have a single string underneath that table on Simonis, you're going to feel it. We're going to get ready to cover this thing. What I like to do is just take and get the staples, throw those out on the table. In case I drag it around, I'm going to put a little knot on there so I can pull on my cord and she won't come loose. All right, guys, now that we've got the table assembled, the slate is on, it's leveled, we've locked in our seams, we've put our wax down, we've got our cards in there, it's 100% perfect. We've got our rail cuts. We basically got this centered. I know I got about an inch overhang there. We're gonna start at this end. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna center it this way. Make sure I got both on both sides. And very quickly, just wanna take and put a couple of little tack staples right there on that end. Once that's in there, I'm actually gonna leave that there. That's where I'm gonna want it. We're gonna come to this end and I'm gonna level it. Make sure that this is not leveled, but centered, right? And now that this is overhanging a little bit, that's why I put some over there, because I'm gonna pull this ever so tightly. Not very much. This isn't where you wanna make sure your felt gets tight, but you're gonna pull that. I don't know if you noticed, but it was about there. I pulled it, maybe an inch or two at the most. And I'm gonna just tack this in right here. And then I'm gonna finish this side of felt. And I'm gonna pull it this direction, kind of this direction. Mainly because I want about, whatever that was, I want about the same. I'm pulling it that way. And I'm pulling a little bit harder now. And I'm gonna take and tack that whole side in there. And then same thing, I'm gonna pull it this way. Notice I'm pulling that direction. Just a little bit this way, not much. I'm kind of paying attention to how much is overhanging here. I want about the same right here. But I'm definitely pulling that way. You'll see some people that will put lots of staples in there. That's about how many I put. That's more than enough. You could do more if you wanted to. Now that that whole side is locked in, we're gonna come down and do the same thing on this side, okay? So I'm gonna pull it this direction and then that direction. And I'm gonna tack it over here on the corner. You're gonna notice. That's the first place I put it. We'll bring that across. And we're gonna pull it this direction. You'll notice that I haven't pulled it really tight lengthwise yet. That will come. You do want your cloth tight. Now I'm gonna move to my center pockets. What I wanna do here is I'm gonna pull right in the middle of the pocket and I'm gonna pull it over just a little bit. And I'm just gonna pull this way just a little bit. The idea is I want some slack in this pocket. Eventually, it's gonna look like that, where you've got some slack in here. That allows you to have really good V cuts and make this look good. If I just pull it like this and tack it here with no slack, this is not gonna look very good. Sometimes you'll get concerned that you're gonna have wrinkles and things. They're very easy to remove. Another good way to do it is simply pinch in the middle of the pocket and pull it back. You can see that I'm loading some slack in there. So for right here, tacking it right there. That's plenty of slack on there. I'm gonna tack that right there. And what the heck, let's pull those out of the way. Now that I've got the ends both tacked, I've got that side tacked, I'm gonna go here. I'm actually gonna finish this pocket. Now I'm gonna pull a little bit tighter. You'll notice kind of how this looks right here. You're gonna see wrinkles here. Don't worry about the wrinkles. I'm pulling tight here to get slack. I'm gonna land that tack right there. So I'm pulling it right there, tacking it on the end. Don't want too much slack in there. I'm tack it right there, and I've pulled a little bit this way. So it's starting to tighten up in here in the middle. In fact, you'll notice if I kind of go like this, it just barely gives you a little ripple. That's gonna get way tighter here in a minute. But now what we're gonna take and do is we're gonna take and finish this pocket and how this looks. So the best way to do this is we're gonna take and make our cuts. Some guys will cut right in the middle. I personally like to start from the middle and then move to the left side. I'm gonna move down about yay far. And if you wanna come in and get a good look at this, this is probably really important as to where you take, you don't wanna cut up here, you don't wanna cut clear down here. Probably about right there, about that distance is what I'm looking at. And I'm gonna cut from the middle. And the other thing is I'm gonna drag my blade to the middle of this. Obviously move your hands so you don't cut it, and if I move my hands together like that, I'll never cut my hand. Same thing on this side. The idea is you want this long. Then I'm gonna take that distance and cut that in half, again from the edge, pull it down. Same thing on that side, see how long those are? That gives us something to grab on. That's actually better than that one, that's plenty good. Next, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take this, and I like to use my thumb and I'm gonna pull this down, and I'm gonna put that up underneath there. Take your gun from upside down. I like to shoot it with my trigger finger at this point. 1, 2 staples. Then we're gonna take this side here. Again, I like to smooth it out with my thumb, pull that back. Pull this in. And if you run out of bullets, like I did, should have checked that. There's actually a little viewpoint in the window there. If you'll look, it'll tell you when you're gonna run out of staples, but I evidently wasn't checking that. So we got that one, but I did not get this one. You'll notice how that looks now. I'm actually gonna fold that back like that. Put that in there. I like to use my thumb. 2 staples in there. You got lots of wrinkles in here. Don't worry about it. Those are gonna go away. You'll notice how those V notches are very low, if not right at the very bottom. We almost didn't need pocket liners on there. This will look even better and better as we finish the table. I'm gonna pull here, and I'm gonna cut right there. Pull here, cut there, cut there. There, you'll notice I want those really long stringies out of the way. Now I'm also pulling this pretty tight. You notice I'm actually gripping it between my fingers there, like that, so I can pull it hard. Smooth it down with my thumb. Okay. I'm gonna hit this side. Smooth that out with your thumb. You know, you gotta pull pretty hard on these. And you don't, by the way, want to push super hard with your staple gun, because if you do, you'll cut it. Like I almost did right there. You'll notice I've got some wrinkles up here. I don't really care about those. But what I do have is really good looking here. This is where these start to get rid of, and your your felt rather starts to get tighter. I'm actually gonna take this corner and pull this over. Notice what happens to my wrinkles there. When I pull this that direction, good and tight, those will start to fade. I'm gonna tack 2 on the ends. Notice about how those are almost half gone. And then we're gonna go over here and pull this way. The other thing I'm doing, guys, is I'm pulling slack into my pocket out here. I like to just tack all my edges. That looks good. Notice how my wrinkles here are all but gone. When I finish pulling from this side, those will finish disappearing. And now we're starting to get after it a little bit. You can see how tight we're actually gonna make that. I'm also pulling into the side. Put that in there. You'll also notice that we've got some slack in this pocket. That's how we want that. So now that we've got the table completely done, we tacked it, finished one end, the other end. We've got all of our pockets tacked. We pulled this direction to get a slack in here, because that's how we want our pockets to look. And you'll notice that this is really loose right here as well. This was done because you'll notice nothing's done here, but we pulled it this direction to put these 2 staples here. Gives me some slack in here. Now what I've got here, on this particular table, some are different, but on this one, I just need to make 1 cut in the middle here. On other tables, I might put a cut here and here to do 1 V-notch. On this one, I really just need to put 1 right there in the center because of how mild my corner is there. So we're gonna take that there. I'm gonna pull this down nice and tight. Use my thumb again to pull that underneath there. Pull that tight, tack that. This is what you want your pockets to look like when you're done. As you'll notice, that V-notch is almost out of sight. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of it, depending on how severe this is cornered or rounded. You might have just a 1/4 inch, no more than probably a 1/2 inch on there. but that's all you want to see on the bottom of that. The rest of that's going to get trimmed off. I'm going to go ahead and staple this side. And because I haven't stapled that side, I'm not going to pull real tight. I'm actually just going to pull a little bit here. Get it something like that. Let's go finish the other side. Again, we pulled this really tight this way to pull lots of slack into our pocket. Take and do your middle cut. Basically where the bottom of the slate's gonna be. Get your staple gun ready. Pull that up underneath there. And you'll notice again, our V-notch is very close to the end there. Now that we've already stapled the opposite end, we're gonna finish this side. All right, guys, now that we've got everything done, we've got our center pockets, we've got our corner pockets, you can take a good look at that one. We're gonna finish, I've actually stapled. The opposite side is already done. So we're gonna do our final pull here. And what I like to do is grab a Leatherman or a pair of pliers or something like that. Go ahead and pull on this. You can pull pretty dang tight. This will not cut or rip on you. You'll notice I'm doing it in the center. Doing it in the center. That's about all the staples you need. And now that we've got that all tacked in, you'll notice your cloth is super tight. There's no, as I'm pushing really hard on there, you're not gonna get any rippling whatsoever in it. Last but not least, when you got all your little tassels and things are up underneath here, you're gonna take your razor knife and you're gonna trim all the excess cloth off of there. So now that we did all that, we've trimmed all the excess off. If you do see on Simonis, if you have these big old, sometimes these little strings will hang down too low, make sure you get those off. We'll check that again when we're done. Once we've got all that off of there, the next thing we're gonna do is get ready for our rails. So there's all the holes in here for your lag screws. So what you wanna do is fill on this. Go ahead, take and cut these open for the center bolt. And if you listen to how tight that cloth is, this is where our lag screws are gonna go through. You'll see some people cut circles in it, that's fine. I personally like to just do an X. This will never tear and never find its way back onto the surface, so don't ever worry about that. That's why you use good quality billiard cloth, it doesn't tear. We are gonna do some covering of the rails on our pool table here with our Simonis 860 cloth. There's definitely different techniques you want to use when you're doing Simonis as opposed to standard cloth like Championship, which is a really common brand. Simonis is more susceptible to wrinkles. It's a little bit harder to do. We've got it all set up. We've got our table ready. We've got our moving blankets down to protect it. First of all, you want to make sure that you get the correct side up because there is a top and a bottom on your cloth. Notice this is the top. So we're going to put the finished side down. First thing we want to do is get our feather strips out. Pull out our feather strip, set that there. Now we're going to go ahead and set our cloth in where we want it to be. Center it up left and right. Take your feather strip. With these, I like to push it in right here. And we're going to make sure that that is right on the edge there. Get our rubber mallet, just get it started. Notice that looks good and clean right there. We're going to put that in. I like to use the palm of my hand to try to steer my cloth left and right like this to make sure that that goes right in where I want it. Take your time. You want just very minimal coming out on that side. And the more even that you can do it, like this, the better it is. And if you do get to the end where this is poking out like this, make sure that I did have it tight on that end because my feather strip is too long. And I'm going to pull that out. I like to put this, get your putty knife or something like that, just to protect it. Put it up underneath there. Take your blade or whatever you've got and go ahead and cut this off. So if you're struggling with your knife to cut that, a saw is actually better. And again, use your putty knife to protect that. Let's clean that off of there. And hopefully we trimmed that correctly. Notice how we still have a bulge on there, so I need to cut back just a little bit more. I'm going to pull that up. Now you can trim it back with your blade. Cut that off, put that like that. And you'll notice that that now wants to lay good and flat. Yes, that looks good. So now that we've got that, our feather strip, it's all pounded in. We're making sure that we're not poking out down here. We're gonna grab our blade, and the trick to trimming this edge right here is so that you don't slip and come across. You don't want to cut this, and you definitely don't want to damage your rail. Most importantly, push down more so than you pull towards yourself. But you want to take and use a really good blade as well. If it's not a good blade, get a good blade. But cut down. Notice I'm kind of just inching myself along there. And again, I'm pushing down as much as I'm pulling towards me, but you want to trim that edge off right there. I also like to trim this back just a little bit here. Trim that back. Once you get that in there, you can take and hammer that in. This is universal on how you would do any pool table. Simonis is no different than anything else, but you'll notice I've got just a couple of little stray strands there. All right, so now that we've got our feather strip in, you'll notice it's nice and trimmed very cleanly on the edge there. You want to make sure you have nothing on here. There's nothing on top of here. Check to make sure your cushion is glued in well. Sometimes you got to add some glue to those things. This thing looks really, really good on here. Then you're going to flip this over. Again, make sure that you've got a moving blanket or something like that to protect your rail. Make sure there's nothing on your surface that's going to scratch your rail. Fold that over. Now we're going to begin the stapling process. So what we want to do, I'm going to start on this end. You'll notice I like to hold my staple gun between my legs backwards like that. It's going to be right where I want it. What we're going to do now is we're going to staple this. Very, very important. What you want to do is land the very first staple in the right spot. And the way you know that is to pull your felt up, pull it up vertically like this. Then you can go back just a little bit. But I want to land my very first staple right there. Notice how my pad ends right there. That's the relation. If you add it clear up here, you add it clear down here, it's not going to be the best place. And the other thing you want to do is make sure that staple is very close to the edge this way. Don't put your staple back in a ½ inch. You want to put them close to the edge. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start stepping down our staples. This you can pull pretty dang tight. Again, we want to get our staples right close to the edge. You'll notice as we're stepping those down. And as we step those down nice and evenly, you'll notice there's no wrinkles on here. I kind of like to fold that under, pull that back. This style of pocket requires this style. Some of them are cut off here and they have a cast iron stud for the pocket. In that sense, you just fold it around the backside to staple it. But for this one, that's perfect. We're gonna actually end up trimming right here. All this is gonna get trimmed off. But here's where the tricky part comes. Now that we've got this with no wrinkles whatsoever, we're gonna start turning the corner here. And the trick that you wanna do with Simonis is, number one, you don't wanna pull this really tight, because you'll notice how I've got a little ripple right there. If I pull that really tight, I wanna pull it snug, and I wanna keep my staples close together. Now the next technique that I've really used over the years, there's many, many different ways you can do this. But what I like to do is pull here and staple behind me. And I also, you don't pull real hard. So this is, it's almost loose. And I almost want to do, if I show you, if I pull normal, I'd pull like that and I'd put a staple right there, and you can see how that would ripple on there. If I were to pull one there, put a staple there, and I put a staple there, you could actually see some rippling in that. I'm not sure how well that'll show up in the camera, but So the trick is, again, don't pull right where you're going to staple and staple here. Pull here, staple here. Keep your staples close, okay? So I'm going to pull like this, and I'm not pulling really hard. I like to get several staples down and then take a stop and look and see how this looks. Now I'm going to look down it, and you can barely hint see any wrinkles whatsoever in there. That actually looks really good. And I'll show you in a minute how we check this. Again, I'm just going to pull here, staple like this, really close together. I probably would do 1.5 times that distance if this was standard cloth. But with that one, that's about what we want to see. Again, pulling there, stapling. Okay, once we get close to the end, let's go down here. Very first staple. I can tell you, if you can land that staple in the first spot, you're going to be a lot easier to make sure that you can do this without wrinkles. Again, it's off the pad, just above it, close to the edge. Now we're going to start our little step down, and I'm pulling this tight currently. And once I round the corner, I back all my pressure off. Notice I'm pulling here and stapling behind me here. And for that last staple, I just barely pull. This is, when you do it correctly, you're going to want to see it step down like that. We're going to pull this back and put 2 in the end. This looks perfect. There's a little dent there, but that's because the facing ends right where you see it. That's totally normal. But you'll notice there's no rippling across here. Little dent in the facing, looks exactly symmetrical. Perfect. The next step that we want to do is take our razor blade here, and I want to make sure that I have a good sharp blade. I think it was getting a little dull. So let's switch that around. And you can take and trim this off. Here and there, and that is done. If you do get lots of these little guys, you can just take and, I kind of like to just pull them together, because what happens with a lot of these little stringies on Simonis, sometimes they'll end up poking out into the playing surface. So they kind of drive you nuts a little bit, but don't worry about them too much. Just make sure that they are back there. Now that we've got that, the last thing I'm going to do, slip my rail over, make sure that this is good and perfect. And then last thing we're going to do is take with our rubber mallet. What I like to do is put my hand on this, okay, so I keep it from bouncing around, and finish pounding. You'll notice that I don't have to hit super hard on there. And that is perfect. That's what you want them to look like. If you want to take and get a look at this, right from the get-go, before I pull this feather strip out, I want to show you something. And what you're going to notice here is if I have that feather strip in there and that's perfectly flush right here, you're going to notice it's sticking out long. It's already sticking out long. If you'll pay attention to that before you start, you're going to want to trim that before you start. So you'll notice this is perfect down here. That's sticking out. I don't like that. A pair of side cutters here that I think will make them perfect cut on there. You can use a saw, you can use a blade. Razor blades just don't work very good, but you'll notice that's approximately what I cut off of there. Put that back in there. Let's size that up. Hey, what do you know? That looks a lot better. So what you're going to want to see is that right there. Now that's not going to poke out. Let's get our cloth. Number one, we want to make sure that we get the correct side facing up. And right now I want the bottom side. And this is one continuous rail, so we got to do 2 at the same time. First of all, take our feather strip. We'll start it right there, right at the end. Get that started. Make sure that it's not poking out. You'll notice that I actually hammered it down because I wanted to sneak it over just a hair. And then we're going to take and pound that in, get our feather strip in. Again, you'll notice this looks pretty good. We're not poking out there. We're going to take and trim. The trick when you're trimming, again, is push down more so than pulling towards you. I like to trim this back ever so slightly right there. It just makes it easier to tuck that behind the leather, or behind the facing, the rubber facing on the end. Because if you just tuck that down like that, it kind of gets bunched up there. But if you'll take and cut it right from about right there, you might think I'm cutting my finger, but I'm not. I'm cutting against the rubber. That will fold down. You'll see sometimes that you've got, we call it licorice, but it's actually a rubber facing that goes on the table. You'll notice on this one, I've got a little more showing on there, and that's fine. You don't want much more than that. But what I do want is I want it to be even. This is how we're going to finish our, okay, the center pocket. I'm going to fold that down. I want a good crease up here. We're going to fold this up, and I can pull that tight and pull that up. The trick here is what we want. You'll know it's good because if the fold starts right at the top of the line and gives a nice clean edge on there, that's where you want that. You're going to land staples back there, and then to finish this back here, we're going to want to make sure that all that's nice and smooth, and we're going to staple it back there behind the facing. Like that, 2 staples, and that's kind of how you want that to look. The pocket will cover right there, so that'll look really good. We've got our rails all covered. One of the techniques that you want to do is make sure you don't pull too tight. As you'll see, there can be some rippling in there and you'll need to fix that. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please come and visit us. You can come to our store in Springville, American Fork, or West Jordan, or you can come visit us online at you know the routine, takeabreakspas.com. And if you're here in Utah, give us a call. We're happy to come and recover your table for you. We can do moves, we do all kinds of things, pool tables. Look us up. Appreciate you watching.